Good morning, everyone. Happy PGP. My name is Mike Orcutt. I'm a founding editor of Project Glitch. We're a small team of journalists focused on the future of the internet. Please take a minute to subscribe to our newsletter, projectglitch.xyz. We also curate live event content, including these discussions and the DC Privacy Summit, which we did in October, and we'll be doing again this October 16th, so mark your calendars. I am honored today to introduce our guest, Sam Maintains. Sam is one of the most well-known white hat hackers in crypto, if not the most famous. He spent the past 4 years working at the venture capital firm Paradigm, and recently stepped down from that role to focus full-time on the Security Alliance, SEAL for short, which he founded last year, if I'm not mistaken. Sam is passionate about crypto security, and in particular how to prevent and respond to hacks that we have all seen in the news, including recently. And that's what we're going to be spending the next half hour or so talking about. So thank you very much for being with us, Sam.
Thanks for having me. There's definitely a bit of a delay on this voice changer, so appreciate you bring up with this.
Yeah, so we'll deal with that. Appreciate it. Let's start by having you fill us in on your professional background. I'm wondering, how did you get your start in cybersecurity, and what specifically drew you to crypto security?
Yeah, so cybersecurity, like most extremely talented people I know, I got my start in games as a kid. And so for me, it was Minecraft. And specifically, I think if you actually go out there and Google my name, you'll actually find some Minecraft plugins that I worked on in the past. So, back when I was a kid, I was writing all this software, and I had to protect them, right? Because I was selling it for a profit and before trying to steal my work. And that was obviously completely unacceptable. And so that's what led me down the rabbit hole of DRM and software piracy. And that was really all the nudge I needed. From there, I sort of wandered around doing bug bounties, doing web app research, etc., until one day when my friends pointed me to this Ethereum thing and said, hey, there's this security thing you might be really interested in. And he was talking about the parity multisig hacks. And so I looked at that, and that just opened a holding can of worms for me. I had to know all about Solidity. I had to know about what happened. Why did this constructor that shouldn't have been called again? How did it get called again? How did this contract delete itself? And the rest is history.
Great. And you started in crypto at the company Trail of Bits, correct? And
yeah, that's right.
And what did you do there? What was your experience there? And sort of how did that evolve over time and then lead to what you did next?
So Trail of Bits was my first being taught like real crypto job. And so, at Trail of Bits, I was doing audits like everyone else. I worked with some really interesting clients, really interesting companies, had a lot of fun. But I think, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And the thing about auditing, even now, is that you can't afford to make any mistakes, right? It's actually one of the biggest reasons I hear for people burning out is because there's just so much pressure on auditors to not make a single mistake at all. It's sort of assumed by the community that once a project has gone through audit, it's sort of infallible. There can't be no bugs. And then whenever there is a bug, it sort of becomes this sort of interesting PR game between the project and auditor and the community and whose fault it is. And so that, obviously is a lot of pressure. I personally, could have done without it. In fact, that's partly why I stopped doing it. I know a lot of the auditors are also a little fed up with it. It's one of the things I'm hoping to change about the community through SEAL, but that sort of is what happened for me at Trail of Bits.
Interesting. So in 2020, back in 2020, and this is shortly before you joined Paradigm, if I'm not mistaken, there were a couple of blog posts that were written that in retrospect were really influential. I think towards the path that you ended up taking. One of them was called "Ethereum is a Dark Forest," and it was written by at that time I think your future colleagues at Paradigm, Dan Robinson and Georgios Konstantopoulos. Who and the subsequent one was co-authored by yourself, and it was called "Escaping the Dark Forest." And these were highly technical posts that talked about some rescue attempts, and one of which was successful, and one of which wasn't. I'm curious. I'm wondering if you can help us understand what it means in practice that Ethereum is a dark forest, or was a dark forest, continues to be a dark forest, and if you can use sort of real life examples, I think that would help.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you who haven't read the two posts that Mike is referring to, chronologically it goes Ethereum is a dark forest first, followed by escaping. And in the first post written by Dan and Georgios, the plot is basically, and having been there that night when it happened, Dan and Georgios found some Uniswap, I believe it is V2 back then, LP positions that were sort of left unattended, right? And they were sort of in a position where anyone who had noticed that the LP positions were there in that particular contract could then call a public function to claim the collateral. And so it was sort of a case of money just lying on the ground. As soon as you noticed it was there, you could take it. The person who had accidentally left it there wanted it back. And so they reached out to Dan as one of the co-authors of Uniswap to help get it back. And this is when Dan and Georgios noticed that, because of the way that the Ethereum ecosystem had evolved, there was now this sort of dark forest happening. And of course, the dark forest being a reference to the free body problem. The idea that, we're now in this adversarial environment where it's actually, in a sense, unsafe to, make a noise, because the moment you make that noise, you'll get picked up by the more advanced adversaries watching this environment, right? And in this case, making a noise would be sending a transaction into the public mempool where all of these MEV searchers and MEV bots were watching. And this is really interesting because at that point in time, when Dan and Georgios came to me and mentioned, hey, we have the situation where we have these tokens that can be claimed by anyone, I told them that I remember dealing with a very advanced MEV searcher months earlier that was able to not only scan the mempool and find these transactions that would be profit generating, but in fact, analyze it and dissect it in such a way that this MEV searcher would then send a new transaction into the mempool, front-running yours, with the exact specific call data needed to replicate what your transaction did, right? It's sort of like, in a very futuristic way, like took apart your transaction, picked out only the important parts, and then like created an amalgamation of a new transaction. It was very scary when I first saw it. I fortunately avoided it by blind luck. Dan and Georgios were not as fortunate, but it did make a very interesting blog post. As we then all found out, it became sort of the kicking off for the entire MEV industry. And then Escaping the Dark Forest was a post that I followed up with a few months later, which detailed the lengths that we had to go through in order to ensure a successful rescue in this new environment that we found ourselves in. And so in that, we found a different vulnerability that put a project at risk with around $10 million TVL. And today, $10 million seems like pennies, but at the time, I assure you, it was a lot of money in a protocol. And knowing what we knew about the Dark Forest, we knew that we had to be really careful. And so we assembled a team of 5 or 6 people. And not to spoil the entire thing, you should definitely read it if you haven't. But the journey took us from discovering the exploit all the way to contacting like a single miner. Back then, we were also proof of work. Contacting a single miner out in Asia who then gave us a private API into their mining network that let us send a transaction directly to their nodes to be included in the blocks they would mine without it going into the public mempool. And so definitely, again, highly recommend both block posts, but just goes to show at the time how difficult it was to keep your transactions private because there were so many of these meth searchers who were ready to jump on any opportunity to make a profit.
Shortly after that, you joined Paradigm. And can you tell us a bit about your experience there, what you learned during that time, and how that stuff helped inspire you to found Seal?
Yeah. So when I joined Paradigm, it was I should back up first. For those who don't know, Paradigm is a crypto VC, one of the top 1 to 2, maybe 3 crypto VCs out there, both in terms of reputation, I think, as well as in terms of AUM. And so when I joined Paradigm, there was no specific mandate. There was no role that I was filling. Like everyone else on the research team, the idea was just that here's someone who's really talented in their own field. Dan is extremely talented at AMM design. Gabe is extremely talented at all sorts of mechanisms. Georgios is just a brilliant technologist. And so when I joined the team, the theory was, okay, well, you're really good at security, so let's go do some stuff that's good for the ecosystem that is aligned with the skill set. And so for the first year or so, I sort of did audits for the portfolio. And then I created Paradigm CTF, which I saw filling a need of having actually good security competitions in crypto. But what I realized was that, well, for starters, when I got into crypto, being a really good security researcher was a really strong edge. And by the time that I was 1 or 2 years into Paradigm, that was no longer a very strong edge. It had sort of become commoditized by all the other very talented security researchers also entering crypto. The other thing I realized was that I wanted to really be doing something more with my time than solving these one-off problems, right? Conceptually, doing these audits was sort of like putting in 1 unit of work and getting out 1 unit of work. And what I wanted to do was figure out how I could leverage up on that, like any good VC. And so putting the 2 and 2 together, what I realized was the thing that I was most suited for in the moment, the best thing I could do for the community, was to take my new edge, which was the reputation I'd built in the space, and use that to coordinate new security efforts, right? In a way where, sometimes all the activation energy you need is not a good idea. It's actually someone to advocate for that good idea, right? And I realized that with the reputation I built up, I could be that advocate and I could help get things moving in a much more effective way. And that would also be the way that I could multiply my output, putting in 1 unit of work and getting out, dozens of units of work from all the people that I'm helping organize.
Something I meant to ask you in the beginning of this conversation, and I'll ask you now before we get into Seal, is I think the audience has noticed by now that I'm speaking with an avatar, and his voice is modified. The question is simply, why do you keep your true identity secret?
Yeah, so this one is very personal for me. When I was younger, of all the things to get this privacy journey started on, it was one of those like online safety classes I took at school. And this one really stuck with me. The teacher said something like, "How many friends do you have on Facebook?" And all my classmates said, "Oh, I have 500 plus friends. I have so many friends." I think my teacher said something like, "Well, those aren't actually your friends. They're your acquaintances." And it was like this very cheesy one-liner, but it was that coupled with the idea that like the internet never forgets that really stuck with me. And I think literally that very same day I went home and I did like a mass purging of my Facebook friends list. It was very heartbreaking for all of my acquaintances. I went through all of the stuff I posted online, filtered out all the stuff that I didn't want the internet remembering forever. And that principle has lived with me to this day. I think it, over time, it might have ratcheted up a little higher than was reasonable, but I think the ratchet is like a very good analogy for online privacy because once you put something on the internet, especially today, it's very hard to go back, right? Once you de-anonymize your voice or your identity or any details about you, In today's world, it's almost impossible to undo that. And so for me, I'd rather not take the chance, especially now that I'm dealing with, um, you know, anywhere from another future cybersecurity expert to nation states. The thought that I, you know, the me of today might be putting something on the internet that the me of 5 years would seriously regret, is a little heartbreaking, and I'd rather not go through that process. It's also very surprising for those who haven't really thought about this. Like, the information that you put on the internet doesn't have to be specific for it to be useful, right? I mean, you could just imagine saying something as innocent as like, "Oh man, the weather here is really bad today," um, but that could narrow it down pretty specifically, like a handful of cities in the US. If, for example, someone knows that you're typically within the US, right? Like, you could check the weather reports, you could determine which cities had, very bad thunderstorms or very bad weather at the moment that you sent the message. If you send a picture of some funny street sign, like people play GeoGuessr and they identify the exact location of photos, right? If you send a really funny poster that's temporary, right? That could have an area code in it, that could have some phrase that's easily searchable. And so it turns out if you want to have good online privacy and you don't want to reveal personal details, you actually end up not being able to talk about a lot of things. And so it's definitely a bit of a trade-off. But for me, with the kind of work that I do, better safe than sorry.
Thank you for that. That's a great explanation. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially with the rise of LLMs. Okay, so moving on to SEAL. What is SEAL? What is the state of it today? I know that it's multifaceted and that sharing information about threats is a big component. What are the other components and how do they work together?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, SEAL stands for the Security Alliance. We took that name. Now there can be no more security alliances. There's only this one. And what we do is we run what we call initiatives for the cryptocurrency space. And so each initiative, we try to solve a specific problem that we have identified. We try to create a solution that, ideally does not rely on charging, exorbitant amount of money for. Ideally, it sort of is accessible to the average user and, ideally solves the problem. And so one of our most well-known initiatives that we operate today is SEAL 911. This is our emergency hotline for people who have been victims of some cybersecurity incident. In practice, what this looks like is, whether you're a project that just got hacked or you're a user that just lost a bunch of money, the best cybersecurity researchers in crypto are just one Telegram message away, right? And once you message us, we can triage what your problem is. We can connect you with all the right people. This is historically something that's been very challenging. You either knew the auditors and you knew the protocols and you knew, who to message, or you didn't. And if you didn't, then you were out of luck. But today with SEAL 911, as long as you have an urgent situation that we've triaged as, highly time sensitive, we can make all the sections that you need, and that's been really helpful. The beauty of SEAL 911 is that it also gives us insight into what's affecting crypto users today. So instead of having to speculate on what the latest problems are or the latest trends are, we have the data, right? And so it's through this data that, for example, we've observed that when we first launched SEAL, smart contract attacks were at sort of the bread and butter of cyber criminals, right? They were almost every ticket that we got was a smart contract hack. And today, that could not be farther from the truth. We do still get the occasional hack ticket, but more often than not, it's some person who's lost their life savings in some trainer or some investment scam or some other user-related scam, right? And so this sort of data is really valuable to us, and it helps us build on our other initiatives. And so I can give a quick run through of the other ones. And then, of course, hand the mic back to you. We have SEAL War Games, which is our red teaming initiative to help prepare projects. We have SEAL Intel, which, as you mentioned, is our intelligence sharing effort. All of this is, fed by SEAL 911, which is another key point. It's just we have all of this interconnectivity across our initiatives. Everything builds on one another. We have SEAL Eclipse, which is aiming to solve the user safety portion of crypto security. So, we collaborate with law enforcement, we collaborate with other infra partners to take down these scams where possible. We have SEAL frameworks, which is our attempt at writing sort of the new safety standards, security status for crypto security. And we have something that we're working on, we're hoping to get published in the next quarter or two. And we're really excited about this one. We're going to launch a certification framework for crypto security built on top of SEAL frameworks itself, which will hopefully bring some standardization to how users and security providers and protocols all interact with each other as far as, signaling this trust and as far as establishing best practices go.
I think one of the most interesting things that SEAL has pioneered is called a safe harbor agreement for white hat hackers. Can you explain what that is and how it works and why it's necessary?
Yeah, for sure. So for those who aren't familiar, the safe harbor agreement for white hats is our attempt at trading a legal framework for conducting what are now known as white hat rescues. And the reason why we need this is really simple, is because crypto is the only space where, in fact, not only do others see your company getting hacked in real time, but sometimes, they might actually find out you're getting hacked before you are if you haven't set up the proper monitoring. And I don't think this is true for any other industry. It's certainly not true for tech as we knew it, in the sense that, some of these large tech companies get compromised and we don't find out for years, right? It's only when they're forced to, they absolutely have to, that it gets this close somewhere. And so in crypto, where everything happens in real time, where there's maximum transparency, it turns out people can see what's happening. And it also turns out that people can sometimes actually help, because, once something is on the blockchain, it's publicly accessible, right? As we talked about, there are these mess searchers that can intercept transactions. They've developed the technology to analyze this large volume of penny transactions in real time and determine which transaction generates a profit and which doesn't. While hacked transactions generate a profit, right? They just generate a profit for the attacker. And so what we notice is time and time again, when these hacks are happening, there's always some person out there who has the infrastructure and has the technology to analyze what would have been the hacked transaction, determine that it was malicious, possibly front run it themselves, and then intercept the funds and return them to the rightful owner, except there was no legal framework under which they felt comfortable in doing that, right? The canonical example that we always point to, the one that really inspired us specifically, is the Nomad bridge hack, where this one was actually extremely painful. We watched for, 2-3 hours, maybe longer, as just regular people even, there were write-ups about this afterwards, just regular people saw the hack happening, copied the payload, put their own address in there, and took a bit of the funds away, because the regular people didn't care about the CFAA or whatever. They just saw there was some money that could be taken, whereas all the experts in the room knew about the legal implications, knew about the risks involved, and personally didn't feel comfortable in taking that risk, right? And so we developed the safe harbor agreement to try to bring a framework in place here that could allow the white hat hackers and meth searchers, anyone who was interested in doing the right thing, who knew about all the layers of legalities involved, to clear the path for them so that they can do the right thing and they can rescue these funds as, sort of the defendants of last resort when everything else had failed.
Very interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about Lazarus, which probably most people in the room know is an infamous nation-state level hacking group from North Korea, and has been in the headlines recently in the wake of the Bybit hack, which was an enormous amount of money, over $1 billion. What can you tell us, first of all, about the role that SEAL has been able to play in response to that hack?
Yeah, so like everyone else in crypto, the Bybit hack, we saw it basically immediately. I mean, it's very hard to not see $1 billion moving out of a crypto exchange's wallet. It sort of sets off red flags everywhere. But as soon as we confirmed with the team that this was not intentional, and we were able to do that through all the hotlines that we've set up with Sue 911, we were quickly able to jump on the case and start mapping out where the funds were going and to send those addresses out to exchanges and other partners that we work with who, could then put a label on those transactions. We were also able to help try to pinpoint where the compromise happened. Although, as it turns out, our pattern matching completely failed us in this case, because what has happened so many times in the past is that Lazarus would target an exchange directly. They would compromise an employee at the exchange. They would infect the computer and then, inject themselves into the daily operations. Right? We've actually seen this play out numerous times with a bunch of exchanges out in the East. Ones that before they got compromised, I'd never even heard of. But in this case, that actually turned out to be the wrong assumption. Because as we were in contact with Bybit, we were also in contact with Safe. And, over time, we found out through Safe that what had actually happened was one of their developers were compromised, right, in a supply chain attack. And so then we were able to point then to the right resources, in this case, Mandians. We were able to make that connection and help them get proper forensics done as soon as possible. We helped them with the disclosure process. So really going through the entire workflow from discovering the incident all the way to helping wrap things up at the very end. It's something that SEAL, whether through SEAL 911 or through the rest of our membership, was actively involved in.
Lazarus is not only a threat to DeFi and crypto, but is a national security threat to the United States and as well as other governments. In January, the governments of the U.S., Japan, and South Korea issued a joint statement warning the blockchain technology industry about North Korea's cyber program, which they said threatens our three countries and the broader international community. It called for deeper collaboration between public and private sectors to counter this threat, and it name-dropped SEAL in the statement. In your view, what are the ways that SEAL can help governments in their efforts to protect financial infrastructure against Lazarus?
So the biggest way that we've been able to help so far is to basically be this bridge between Web 2 and Web 3, right? In Web 2, you have a handful of big players. They're almost certainly happy to set up direct connections with the government themselves, if not, having very obvious points of contact, either on LinkedIn or over email or where have you. The same could not be less true for crypto, where, as we're all very familiar with, a lot of the actors in crypto are not interested at all in communicating with any government. A lot of the actors in crypto don't use LinkedIn. They don't have an email. You can either reach them through Twitter DMs or Telegram, or you can just not talk to them, right? And so there's definitely a bit of a gap between where the government's ability to basically reach out to these crypto actors end, and where our ability to navigate this new environment begins. And this is really important because, as we found out last year, there's actually a specific unit within the FBI that's solely dedicated to Lazarus, right, to North Korean cyber operations. And so they've been diligently working behind the scenes, tracking Lazarus as they move through computer systems worldwide, identifying victims through traces that Lazarus leaves behind, and notifying these victims, ideally before they actually get compromised during the reconnaissance phase, right? And this works really well in Web 2, and it doesn't work as well in Web 3, again, because of that communications gap. And so that's really been the place that we've been able to have the most impact, is to coordinate with this particular unit and to help them make connections with people in crypto that are pretty hard to reach because they're only on Telegram, or because they don't respond to feds or government people without a very good reason or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, super interesting, what's going on behind the scenes. Couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. The title of this discussion is The Developing State of Crypto Incident Response. Is it fair to say that SEAL and the field of crypto security incident response generally is a work in progress, and what still needs to be done if that's the case? What are the most urgent priorities?
I would say, like all things in security, it's definitely a work in progress. That's not to say that we haven't made progress. It's to say that, security is not a solved game and never will be. And so on one hand, part of the reason we launched CO 911, to take you back a brief moment, is during a particularly scary incident. This is the Viper 0 day. We found a bug in the Viper compiler that put a handful of curve pools at risk, right? And although the actual magnitude or the scope of the vulnerability was small compared to, say, a Solemnity compiler bug, it was still extremely scary in the sense that it was a compiler bug, right? And that's something you basically never want to hear. What was really noteworthy about this incident is that for the first 3 or 4 hours, we basically had like 3 separate war rooms happening in parallel. Different white hats noticed that this hack had occurred, root caused to the compiler, and it spun up their own little war rooms to try to triage and notify the affected projects. But what we really needed was just one point of contact in one place where people could coordinate, because that would have saved so much wasted effort that people spent basically deducing the same information. And so from that sense, today we have CO 911, and we're able to really easily deduplicate war room efforts, right? Like multiple people might reach out to us to notify us about a particular hack, and we can tell them, hey, thanks for letting us know. Actually, the first person who let us know 3 hours ago, we already spun a whole war room because of that, right? We don't have to go through all this wasted effort. We set up all these hotlines, as I alluded to. So between some of the biggest protocols and exchanges in crypto now, we have direct connections with, where the understanding is if we message you in this particular group chat, it means something seriously bad has happened and like you need to respond immediately. It sort of sets expectations around response times through that particular medium. So, we know that it's very high priority. So in that sense, we've already made a lot of progress in instant response. On the flip side, can we make more progress? Of course. Yeah, as I alluded to in the Bybit hack, like there's still a lot of manual effort involved in transmitting these flag addresses, right? You might have saw that Bybit themselves launched an API in a website for cooperative exchanges and instant exchanges to basically pull addresses from and action at their at their own discretion. But the fact that Bybit had set something up like that is because there's just no infrastructure for that in the moment. And so automating that workflow and, just in general facilitating more efficient information sharing is something I think we need to really solve in the next, ideally in the next year. And that's something that, we're hoping we will solve through initiatives like CO Intel and CO 911.
In that vein, what would you like more policymakers here in DC and other capitals around the world to understand about the state of crypto security, the state of incident response, and the potential role of SEAL?
Well, I think maybe the first message is just that, despite the numbers on the wall, which, look pretty bad, I'm not going to lie. The fact of the matter is, we have been improving over the years. We've been improving, I think, at a much higher rate now than we have been previously. And so, the first is just like, it's not all doom and gloom out there, right? There's people like myself, like everyone else at SEAL, who are genuinely interested and have been putting in the time, I've seen it with my own two eyes, into making the space safer, not just for the scammers, but more importantly for the users, right? Obviously, we can't discriminate who is using crypto, but we can make it safer for everyone involved. I think the next big message is just, I mean, not that DC hasn't seen a person named Sam come in and promise to solve all crypto's problems, but I would love for SEAL to work closer with policymakers and with people who are interested in trying to make the space better, right? I think the point of SEAL is one to foster collaboration within the industry, right? We have a lot of people who are working in security, and the point of SEAL is to coordinate all of that effort so that we're all moving in the same direction and not sort of pulling in opposite directions. But the second mission is to basically create a bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. We think that we have the membership and we have the diversity in opinions to represent what crypto security is thinking at any given moment. And we're interested in collaborating with as many people as possible in order to help our initiatives grow and succeed, which will help the space become more secure. And so if there is anyone in DC that is interested in helping us with this mission, is interested in meeting and chatting, we would love to, either to help unlock progress or just to be the technical voice in the room. That's the role we play with some of these law enforcement agencies, right? Is they've identified some crypto crime, but they're not really sure what specifically is happening, or they need some help to analyze a particular, hack payload or anything like that. And that again is something we can provide value in. And so, I guess to summarize, basically we're here and we're willing to help and we're excited to chat. And so, let's chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam, for taking the time. We know you're extremely busy. Thanks for everyone for coming today. It's been great.